All right, guys, we're back with another episode, and I got a very special guest today. This is Paul from the channel Understanding Conspiracy, and he is one of the first YouTubers to make the connection between clowns and demons. I made many videos connecting clowns between demons, and I've gotten these ideas from this YouTuber right here, and we're going to talk about it. So let's get started. How did you come to the conclusion that there are certain demonic spirits that look like clowns and jesters, that type of aesthetic?
Um, well, we're going back quite a
Way
while,
back.
to be honest. Um, so I started my channel in maybe 2012, in the build up to the end of the world, when that whole hype was happening. And I just spent that whole time, up until that point, years up until that point, and years after that point, researching everything occult, everything spiritual from every angle. I started as a new ager, kind of well, I wouldn't say a new age. I wasn't much of a hippie, but I definitely came at it more from the Eastern spiritual perspective. And through years of research just into conspiracy and all things occult, I learned a lot of things. I picked up a few things along the way, which is all documented on my channel historically. And as I came to the Christian perspective, you learn a lot about the Nephilim, and the Genesis conspiracy. A lot of Gary Wayne's work was influencing me at that point.
So kind of
Um,
explain the whole Nephilim thing, because not everybody's aware what a Nephilim is, where that comes from, because
yeah,
the canon that we have in the Bible currently, it only gives us so much information on the Nephilim and the origins of demons, but then you got extra biblical books or apocryphal like Enoch that the early church did read, and I believe Jesus
exactly.
quotes, and in the book of Jude it's quoted as well. So yeah, kind of explain the whole Nephilim thing.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the information. I mean, Genesis doesn't really give us much. It just says, the sons of God came unto the daughters of men and bore offspring, and it was kind of breezed over after that point, and then it goes to Numbers after the flood, and you have these the tribes wiping out these other tribes, and a lot of people say God causing the mass genocide of people for no reason, and I can see why a lot of people had that perspective, but when you factor in, like I said, the extra biblically endorsed texts, as Rob Skiba used to call them, things like the Book of Enoch, you would then discover, in the apocryphal text that, yeah, there were giants around, and it's basically the reason for everything that was a bit misunderstood by most mainstream Christians is all in these books. Um, yeah, so there were people better than I who had put this research together.
And Rob
Again, I was
Skiba is
just
a big one when it comes to this.
yeah. It's may God rest his soul. He was a great man, and he did a lot of hard work, and he did his thing, and I followed him for a long time. Again, and people like Gary Wayne, who wrote the book on the Genesis 6 conspiracy, he was a huge influence for me. Um, when I was coming into my Christian perspective, because he explained a lot of the things. Because see, I didn't grow up Christian. I didn't grow up in a church. I didn't grow up in that kind of world. I don't speak Christianese. I don't sound like a Christian to most people because I was never raised that way. I came into it late in life. I suppose I was born again, to use that phrase. Maybe what, I'm 30 now. I would have been maybe 24, 25 at the time. Maybe earlier than that. I lose track, to be honest now. Um, like I said, I had these people better than me doing this research, and it got to a point, where I was making this channel, and I was doing a lot of work into the occult, exposing the usual things most people do. I wasn't really breaking much ground, to be honest, but I did create like a community, where we basically just help each other deal with understanding this stuff. Because my angle was always, this stuff is terrifying knowledge to have, and not a lot of people really know how to handle it, or cope with knowing about it. And I suppose I wanted to create like a therapy group for people to kind of come and express their emotions a bit about this situation, because you can lose a lot of friends and family learning about this stuff.
Oh,
You
definitely.
can easily push people away and come across as quite
I mean, you'll look
uh,
like a weirdo looking into this stuff. And
exactly,
yeah, that's the one thing
and
I learned about my channel too, is it's almost like a safe space for ex-drug addicts to talk about their experience without seeming crazy. And often they're
yeah,
saying the same thing, like I had a few meth addicts or ex-meth addicts. I've even interviewed one of them who were saying the same thing, that they saw like shadow people and other demonic beings, jesters.
Hmm. No, absolutely. Yeah. Well, this is the point of the clown topic.
Mhm.
I remember it was around 2016. There was suddenly just this flurry of clown sightings everywhere, and people dressed in clown costumes just standing menacingly on street corners, or videos popping up of them in like abandoned car parks late at night, just kind of wandering around, and some of them had knives on them. I'm sure a few of them were staged, and a few of them were genuine. It was mixed up in this media hype at the time. But I just thought it was strange, why even make a story about this? As we understand, mainstream media is controlled. They control the narrative, and when something's put on it, I go by the mantra that, well, they probably want us to see this for a reason. And I was just thinking about it, and that was kind of one thing that kind of started to jog in my mind, among many other things, because I myself, I suppose, I'm an ex-drug addict. I didn't do the hard things. I never injected anything to myself. It wasn't that, but I went more down the psychedelic route and the heavy cannabis use. And obviously, coming off of those things as I became a Christian and started to fast and lose all these habits, as I very slowly. It didn't all happen at once, but I had some experiences that kind of were very, very strange. And I've always, I don't know, I've always had a visual, creative mind, and I've always been a vivid dreamer. So every night I dream, and it's just the craziest thing ever. And then I wake up and forget about it, but I know I've created this whole world in my mind. So I've always been quite a visual person as an artist, and one day, out of the blue, for no reason I can understand, I was just sat on the sofa watching TV. I was doing something arbitrary, nothing important. But suddenly, my brain was just flooded, my vision was just flooded with this image. And it's as though I was in the DMT realm, which I'd already experienced before in the past. So I recognized the space I was in as familiar. But in this void was just this, I was looking up at an enormous black and white, purple, wide-lipped jester. But it wasn't like a man dressed in jester's garb. It was literally, its skin was all of these shapes. It
So the
was,
protrusions coming out of the head, this was all
yeah,
part of its body.
it was just its physiology. It was, I suppose you could call them horns, but it's more spider-like in its appendages. It was very bizarre. It was insane. In fact, this thing was so enormous. I could see little. It just sounds crazy now I think about it. I listen back to it, but little gold vehicles were flying around it. Which looked manned. It was a very, very strange image, and it couldn't have lasted any longer than maybe 10 seconds. And then I was back, and I was just like, what the hell was that? I've never had anything like that before. It just happened for no reason. And that really got me kind of rolling with this something clown like is on the other side. That's my. It's as though I got a vision from God in a sense. That's the only way I could really describe it, because they never interacted with me while I was there. It was like I was a passive observer. I was just there to see and then to be brought back, and that was it.
Like you were allowed to just get a glimpse of it.
Basically, yeah. Because it's funny, because when I did do DMT years before this experience, so years had passed before I'd actually done any of these drugs. It was a thing of my past by this point. So it wasn't something I was actively looking to see. It was something I was trying to leave behind. And maybe it was during a time when I was coming off of I just kind of quit using cannabis after 8 years straight of use. So maybe my mind was kind of a little bit in a haze as it was, and going through a transition period. But this vision did just flood my mind, and it never left me. It never left me. And I also had years prior to this, I suppose you could call it a nightmare, where I was being chased by a man in a purple like overcoat with a purple hat, and with ribbons flying off him, multicolored ribbons, and it was more like a Morris dancer in England,
It was
but
very like psychedelic.
yeah, very psychedelic image. It was. My words don't describe how truly psychedelic it was. I can only use simplified languages to describe what I saw, but It wasn't of this world, but this purple bright colored entity with these glowing eyes, kind of like its face was shadowed under the rim of its hat type of thing. And from that experience with this hat man entity, I did make a video on my channel which fully describes the whole thing. I discovered an author called Heidi Hollis, who had created a full book about people who have met this entity called the Hat Man. I didn't know this at the time until after the experience when I looked into it, but thousands of people interact with this person, and that got me onto shadow entities. And again, I had this notion already in my mind from this experience that happened maybe 7 years ago now, a long time ago, that these entities are psychedelic looking creatures when you actually meet them, And then obviously, because I am in this DMT psychedelic realm, taking mushrooms, taking LSD, going down this whole Zen, Terence McKenna, Alan Watts Buddhist Eastern perspective worldview, I'm immersed in it all. I had heard Joe Rogan's podcasts and experiences about people meeting jesters when they go to these realms. And I didn't meet them myself. It's, again, I have theories as to why. I think I may have been being protected in some way. But everyone else around me was certainly seeing them, just not me. So I had this, just overall, my consciousness was highly aware of beings behind the veil have a specific look to them. And when I learned about where demons come from, so we'll get onto this now, as you mentioned, asked me earlier, the Nephilim. So I have just made a video about this where I tried to break it down as clearly as I could. It's the recent video, and I put a lot of images to it, but I'll try and do a quick recap now, for your viewers. I'm sure they're probably aware if they're listening to this, but we'll humor them as well.
New people join all the time.
Yeah, of course. So essentially, now this is going to be a quick summary, so I may miss some things. I'm sure you can fill me in, but angels rebelled against God and came to earth. They decided one way or the other to create offspring with human women. We're not going to debate how that happened. That's just what happened. Those offspring became the kings and rulers over mankind very quickly because they were giants and terrifying in nature, and unsurprisingly, people treated them as special and bowed down to them. And plus, they were prideful and saw themselves as something great anyway because they're sons of angels, so they loved that people worshipped them. So they became the kings and rulers of the earth. And then it seems like during their rule, which probably went on for a very long time, mankind who worshipped these beings wanted to emulate these beings through their own bodies, wanted to venerate them, be like them, because clearly they're better than humans in their opinion, because they were bigger.
Elongated skulls, the shamans, the makeup, the white.
Oh, yeah.
Smile.
Imagine seeing one of these things, they're faster, stronger, probably more spiritually and magically powerful than man. They probably
more
have abilities
intelligent.
more probably have abilities, to manipulate matter in ways which we just couldn't imagine as ourselves. And I think the humans of the day wanted to be like them. So I've coined a phrase that mankind became Nephilimified. They kind of turned themselves into mini Nephilim to venerate their kings and rulers, the sons of the angels, the real Nephilim, the giants. And this is where it comes into the Moses situation, the Noah situation where the flood happened. It said that Noah was perfect in his generations. And yes, of course, he was a moral, just man who walked with God, who had all of that going for him. But he was also genetically perfect in his generations. He hadn't chosen to corrupt his genetics to be like the false gods.
Yeah, and we know this because in Genesis it says that all flesh was corrupted, meaning not just humans, but animals as well. And that's where we get all these legends of the animal hybrids, right? The half horse, half man, the minotaurs, the what are the goat?
The fawns. All fairy folk, fairies, mermaids, little people, the elves, the gnomes. Then you have the Blemmies, which are kind of an obscure one. The chest heads, you have this. Yeah, they have the centaurs, the half bird, half man. You have Medusa, the Nagas of India
Aliens.
culture.
Yep.
You know, the snake people, and all of these, I believe, are humans who turned themselves into something else.
Do you remember in the
The
Bible it also talked about the lion-faced people?
the lion men of Moab, I
The lion
believe.
men of Moab, correct?
Yeah,
Yeah, it talked about them as well. Do you think
absolutely.
that's just kind of metaphorical? Or you think that's physical? You think it's talking about
Oh,
real?
I think it was physical. I think it was all very literal.
Same
Yeah,
here.
I think it's easy to put this under the realm of mythology, and symbology, but I don't believe in that. I think it's all just literal.
I think the
That's
Bible is very black and white for the most part. If you're a
yeah,
clean slate and you've been born again, the Bible's incredibly simple.
absolutely, yeah. And like I said, I think all of these strange beings are a result of mankind genetically changing themselves to try and be more than human, to try and be like their gods at the time, which were these Nephilim kings and rulers. And that's why we have all of these, you know, a mystical land full of magical creatures. Well, they were once God's creation, human, and they've just completely corrupted themselves to be like this. And that's why we have these mythical lands in constantly portrayed in media. I mean, I watched a film today, off a bit of a tangent, but kind of on track, called Onward. It was a Pixar movie, and it's literally about a world where magic still existed in the past, and all it was full of these creatures we've just described. But then magic was difficult to use, so they discovered electricity and very quickly became like our society. This is our society today with skyscrapers, planes, cars, jobs, taxis, everything, but full of magical elf people who have just gone for that life instead of a magical life. And I'm watching it. I was watching this opening scene depicting how things used to be. And I'm like, that's it. That's how things actually used to be on the earth, you know, but Pixar would describe it as a magical, wonderful thing for the
Yeah.
children to get into,
Kind of
you
like
know.
Narnia, right? If you've ever seen the movie Narnia with all the
Yeah,
hybrids and basically like
just
that.
just like that land, or just like the land in Lord of the Rings, you know, Middle
Exactly.
Earth, or just like you can go on. It's endless. We can go on.
Yeah.
You know, this.
What you know that
It's
one
Dungeons,
quote that art imitates life?
yeah, it's Dungeons and Dragons, isn't it? You know,
Basically.
it's
Yeah.
it's all of that, and that's where all this mythos comes from. It's biblically grounded. It's because you know, I think it was a third of the angels came down to Mount Hermon and made the pact with each other to do this thing, which is go against God's creation. Because why should we bow down to them? We were here first. We're better. You know, that's all it was about. And it's worth saying during this time, the fallen angels were there, and they were the gods, the pagan pantheon of gods. Every culture had a pantheon of many gods. You know, the Greeks had their pantheon. You know, the Romans had their pantheon. The Norse had their pantheon of gods. Many, male and female, and they're always the god of something. You know, the god of thunder, the god of water, the god of whatever. They were the fallen angels.
And
They were the
they're
ones
all
that
very
actually.
similar. A common god in the pantheon sphere is some kind of god of lightning, right? You
Yeah.
got Thor, you got Zeus. In a Slavic mythology, you got Perun, and he was
Mm-hmm.
very similar to Thor as well, except he had an axe. So they're all very similar looking gods and similar
Mm-hmm.
inscription, and they're all
Exactly.
fallen angels, basically.
Yeah, that's all it is. It comes back to the one thing. Now, I do think as well though there was quite a lot of fallen angels that came down, so it's very possible they aren't the same fallen angels in each pantheon covering. They just all split up and covered ground around the earth. So each
Created their own
culture had
kingdoms.
yeah had their own pantheon, and it was you know, this set of 20 fallen angels went north and became the pantheon up there. This set came down here to the Middle East and became the pantheon for the Greeks. You know, and it's they all had the job to play, you know, and during this time it's said in the Bible as well, they taught mankind a lot of things that corrupted us even further. So the art of warfare, the art of deception, the art of astrology, the art of makeup, the art of everything bad basically and
How to
sinful
use
that causes
psychedelics, sorcery,
yeah,
like
the
that.
cutting of roots, you know, pharmakia and all this sort of
Mhm.
thing is all mentioned in there, and it even named the angels that did it in the Bible as well, in the extra biblical text in the Watcher's book as well. It's all laid out in black and white in writing. This is what happened, and it makes sense to me, you know. So I think that's laid out basically the past as it was,
Yeah,
you
who the
know.
Nephilim are.
Yeah, and there's even a hierarchy. You have angels at the top, the gods. You have their sons, who are kings and rulers. Then you have below the Nephilim, humans who corrupted themselves to be like the gods and the Nephilim. And by this point, all the flesh was corrupted, like you said. Even the animals were all mashed together in weird, corrupted forms. You know, you had hydras, you had all sorts of things. You had phoenixes going around, what are they called, griffins, lions with snake tails,
Dragons
and
and all
you
that.
know, yeah, all the animals were corrupt as well. And so God, preserved what was originally his on the ark with Noah, and the only humans left that weren't corrupted. It said his family would have had some corruption in them, but the way it was all planned out is that it would eventually disappear, and obviously the remainders would get wiped out in the after flood math, if you want to call it anything. But because these entities never should have existed to begin with, they had no divine right to exist. They didn't really have a soul or spirit that was compatible with going anywhere else other than remaining here on the corrupted earth. So when the flood came and got rid of them physically, spiritually they remained. And that's what we call demons today. And
So
again, as there was a hierarchy, in the physical form, you had the Nephilim rulers, and then you had the human underlings. In the spiritual realm, we have the lesser demons and we have the higher demons, I'm sure, which represent the different classes as they were then. And I'd like to get into this with you today, if we can, because I think you might have discussed it with other people, but this hierarchy in this class of demons, I think there may be some, like the Nephilim, who are powerful enough, who want to possess people physically and control them. But then I think there are the lesser demons who can't necessarily possess humans, but maybe they can
cause chaos, basically.
demonize people.
Yeah, so I have made a video on the hierarchy of demons. So the Bible does describe this hierarchy. It says the word principality, right? And a principality is a place where it's ruled by a prince. And in the Bible, this prince, or maybe many princes, is given a name, and it's Beelzebub. And there's all kind of theories for who Beelzebub is. Some say it's the devil himself. Some say it's his like chief in command. But it's said that Beelzebub has the power over demons. He even has power to cast out demons if he wanted to, or send them into the pit. I believe you know who Jerry Marzinski is, right? You probably interviewed him already as well.
I'm actually talking to him tomorrow.
Oh, tomorrow. Yeah, so
tomorrow night.
when I interviewed him, he talked about how there's a hierarchy as well. And when he would talk to his schizophrenic patients, the voices would tell him not to tell others about their existence. And that if they ever get caught, the masters of these voices or these spirits will send them to the pit. And Jerry at first was all like, well, I don't know what the pit is, right? But the Bible tells us what the pit is. It's the abyss. Remember when Jesus encountered Legion, Legion was telling Jesus, please don't send us into the pit. It's not our time yet. And Jesus was like, yeah, you're right. It's not your time yet. So there is a hierarchy, and these demons have masters, and they're often threatened by their masters to not get caught, right? They want the world to think that schizophrenic voices are just hallucinations, chemical imbalances, which none of these things are testable and provable, right? It's been
no, of course not.
There's zero proof for this, and Jerry Marzinski is a perfect example of this. He says there's no proof whatsoever. We just accepted it as fact. So they thrive off people's ignorance, not knowing that they exist, especially the church. In church, they don't talk about these kind of topics. They don't get into the Nephilim, even the belief of how God flooded the earth. They basically teach that, humans were just bad people. They were immoral, and that's why God flooded it. I'm like, that's not the full story. The full story is DNA was corrupt, and Genesis says all flesh was corrupted. So yeah, there's definitely a hierarchy. And like you said, there's lesser demons, there's more powerful demons, and there's rulers. And there's the lesser demons. An example would be gremlins. Yeah, have you heard of the stories during World War II?
I've no, enlighten me. That sounds interesting.
Oh, I made a video on this. So do you know what a gremlin is?
I know what it is by virtue of the films. But go ahead.
That comes from true stories. During World War II, that's when planes first started to be built, right, for war. And during the war, a lot of pilots would say that they would see these little beings, basically, or hallucinate these beings causing havoc, like messing with the control panels, attacking their plane, trying to attack them. And some people have given theories on why they were seeing these things, such as the cockpit not being pressurized and the fear causing them to have these hallucinations. But a lot of pilots throughout the world, in Germany and America, would just report seeing these beings during World War II, high up in altitude, attack their plane. They would see them on the wings. So yeah, the movie, and you remember that Bugs Bunny cartoon with the gremlins? I don't know if you've ever seen it.
Again, no.
Yeah, so all those stories, that's where it comes from.
I do remember seeing, now you mentioned this on a tangent of it, I remember seeing maybe an episode of The Simpsons where that was referenced. I think they were referencing an old film from the 50s in a Halloween special. Yeah. And he looks out the plane window and there's a gremlin on the wing tearing everything out.
That's the Twilight Zone.
That's the one. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So that's where that comes from, is it? That's the
So
yeah. Okay.
it's a true story. Pilots would come back reporting that they were seeing these creatures, and it got so bad that they actually made like a an instruction manual how to avoid gremlins. Right? If you start hallucinating these things, don't give in to them. Don't pay attention to them. And they literally had instruction manuals in America. It got
Hmm.
it got that bad to the, and you can even find old posters about gremlins back in the day. And then after World War II, it became kind of like a joke to blame any kind of mechanical mishaps on gremlin creatures, basically. But they were these
So
little.
were there literal problems with the plane once they landed? Like, were things actually removed and damaged?
So it got the problems got so bad sometimes that pilots would crash their planes.
Hmm.
They would
Wow.
leave their planes and just parachute out and crash them into the sea, or they would literally experience mechanical damages where the plane wouldn't start, and they would report like these little creatures are attacking the plane,
Hmm.
right? And of course, everyone's like, "Oh, you're just crazy. You're seeing things. You're hallucinating." But no, these stories are real. I'm surprised you haven't heard of it, but it's yeah.
Well, what can I say? I mean, I have been off for 5 years, taking a break from all this. I have come back recently, but um, I can't learn everything. I
Yeah,
can't
it's
research
interesting,
everything.
man. I mean, it's good that you're taking a break. You need a break from this sometimes, because
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Well, on that topic, while we're on that idea, then so what you're saying here is people saw entities physically messing with physical property, the
yes.
plane. Okay. And what obviously we discuss quite a lot in our culture is that these are spiritual beings in a spiritual plane that don't have physical bodies. But then there are all these testimonies and stories of people having physical encounters with demons, physical encounters, real,
Sometimes, yeah,
you know,
sometimes they're physical, and often they're hallucinations. So the demons make it look like they're messing with your stuff,
mhm.
but in reality, nothing's happening. So they're causing a mirage or like an illusion of something going wrong.
It's
Maybe it
kind of
did,
kind of
maybe
like
it didn't.
kind of
But
like the alien abduction phenomena.
yeah,
People are
basically,
swear to God they were taken up into a craft and then taken back to their bed. And then the argument is, you never really left your bed; you had an hallucination. But they always claim, they were kind of. I think the usual story is they were impregnated in some way, or DNA was extracted from them in
yeah, yeah.
some way, or something like that. Some kind of story.
So
See, I don't know exactly what to make of the physical stories where they're claiming they are physically here still.
physically
Now,
touched and stuff, yeah.
yeah, I mean, is it all just a psyop and someone's out there trying to muddy the waters and make people think, yeah, these entities are physical and you don't have to worry about the spiritual side of things. It's actually these real monsters lurking in the woods, like Bigfoot or something like that, or the
Yeah.
chupacabra, or the cryptid phenomena.
So
Um,
my basic theory on this is that demons aren't non-physical beings, right? They're not, we can't sense them with our five senses. It's only when we mess with the devil's devices that we start experiencing them and the
mhm.
veil gets torn, basically.
Yeah,
So they're non-physical beings, and they're actually electrical in nature from what I've kind of studied into this stuff, and I made videos on this. But yeah, so they're non-physical beings, they're electrical in nature, and you even see this in stories of haunted houses, right? Where technology is being messed with, the light switches are going off, the TV, the radio. So some people say that maybe during World War II, with this whole gremlin phenomena, the technology was messed with. In fact, what's interesting in Islam, do you know what the jinn is in Islam? The
yeah,
genie,
smokeless fire. I think they
the
described
smokeless
it.
fire. Yeah. In Islam, they believe that the jinn is at the edge of fire,
Mm.
basically electrical in nature. I guess that's their way of explaining it.
Yeah,
But they believe that there are good jinn and bad jinn. They believe that some jinn help you with poetry and writing music, kind of like we have, stories today about spirits helping musicians write better music.
hmm
But I don't believe there are good or bad jinn. I think all spirits are evil in terms of,
yeah. I subscribe to the Nephilim story I explained
yeah.
earlier. They all have one source, and it's not good.
So yeah, back to the hierarchy, right? You want to talk about the hierarchy of demons?
Well, yeah, because people have asked me, what is the hierarchy? I've been racking my brain to try and figure out just exactly what's going on there. So I don't doubt there are many different classes of demon within the classes of demons. So at the very top, I think not all. I think you mentioned this. Not all the fallen angels mated with women. Some of them didn't get cast into the chains into the pit, did they? Some of them were left that punishment out. But I think they did have to remain here on Earth in kind of a limited capacity of some kind. They weren't allowed back into heaven. They'd lost that ability to be in heaven again. So I think a lot of the angels who did mate with human women and corrupt the gene pool, they're the ones who were removed and put into chains, you know.
Hmm.
And obviously there'll be a time in the end where they're loose for a small season, and we can get into when that is, because that's a whole other bucket of worms to start digging through. But if we're just going off that story alone, so then I think in the demonic realm we do have these, you know, the main orchestrators and devisers of this. I think Lucifer may be one of them. The highest order of angel are working for the bad side, and they control their children, which are the Nephilim spirits, the true Nephilim, the firstborn Nephilim, the giants, the rulers. I think they're maybe like, you know, just below the angels in rank, like the generals, you know, in some way. If the angels are the kings, you know, and the princes, then these are the generals for the monarch, you know what I mean? The rulers of the army type of thing, or the children. And then below them, I think then we have many classes of corrupted humans, basically. And I assume there would have been those who would have been closer to the priesthood of worship of these entities. So, you know, the priesthoods of Molech and things like that, you know,
Hmm.
the humans who really zealously worshipped these entities, they're probably just under them in the demonic ranking as the leaders of the lesser demons underneath them, which were just humans who have
Yeah,
corrupted themselves.
straight
I think that's it.
principality.
Yeah, I think
Easily,
that's
yeah.
it. Do you want to add to that hierarchy in any way? Because as far as I'm aware, I think that is the limit of where it goes. You know, I can't
Yeah,
really.
so when people think of demons, especially in like the Christian community or on, television, they're not dumb little creatures. They have a government system, kind of like we have here. They have
Mhm.
rulers and princes, and they run in gangs, right? If you read throughout the Bible, there are gangs of spirits possessing people. So they're very
Mhm.
intelligent in that way, from what I've seen.
Yeah, and obviously on possession, you know, this is what the possession problem is all about. At the end of the day, these entities, they want a body again. They are bodiless, and they have been for a very long time, you know, and they are timeless, formless, senseless in a sense. You know, they don't have the ability to experience things they used to experience because they don't have a body. And you know, there's this misunderstanding in a lot of spiritual cultures that the body is like a prison for the soul, and the dream is to be free from the trap of the body, you know, be free from the trap of reincarnation in certain Eastern ideas. And I think that's such a twisted inversion of the truth, because the entities who currently don't have a body,
They
the
want a
evil people,
body.
they want one. They're desperate for one, and they're trying to convince us that we don't want ours. That makes sense, you know, that they would
Yeah,
try and convince
because
us of that,
it's only with our bodies that we can experience the pleasures of earth, right?
of life. We can live.
Yeah,
We can only live with a node to live through, which is the body. And I don't think the spirit and the soul and the body are separate. I think it's all
all
one
together.
being,
Yeah,
you know. And I don't think we're like spiritual beings having a fleshly experience necessarily. I think there's a bit more of a existence with the body and the soul is the spiritual experience.
complete union, right?
It's
Because
all
even in a
one.
new heaven, new earth, I believe we get new bodies. We're not just non-physical, disembodied spirits, right? Even
Exactly.
the Bible, there's a new heaven, new earth, a physical place, and we get new bodies, immortal ones, kind of like Adam and Eve.
Yes, you know,
Yeah,
this idea that the spirit and the body is necessary to be one with each other in order for there to be a sense experience, in order for there to be anything, you know.
yeah, yeah.
And that these entities, it's said that, you know, as bodiless demons now, bodiless entities, they wander in dry places. It's described arid places. It's
Yeah,
mentioned
these
in
other
Luke, and
dimensions.
I think Mark mentions it. I think Luke mentions it. It's all mentioned. All of them say, you know, when you
Yeah,
cast a demon out, it's made to wander in dry places, and I think that literally means it's a place where senses and desires can't be quenched. They thirst, but they have no mouth or tongue to quench the thirst. You know, they
exactly.
hunger, but they have no way of eating. They have no. It's dry. It's nothingness
There's
to
no
them.
life. It's these interdimensional places. There's no time, no space, no matter. It's an awful
Which,
place, right? It's dark.
exactly, which is why if you allow them, they will gladly inhabit your
Oh yeah.
body, and as long as you don't know they're there, they can stay for as long as they want. You
To
know.
experience their Nephilim appetites once more. Like back in the day, they were cannibalists, they
Exactly.
were murderers, right? They did
Hmm.
awful things and they possess other humans. Like all serial killers are possessed by Nephilim spirits.
Hmm. Well,
Like Jeffrey Dahmer, he ate people, he killed, and he was always disassociated from his actions, almost surprised that he was
mhm.
committing these acts. If you look at him
Yeah.
in interviews, he's almost unsure of himself. He's like, did I really do all this? Like, maybe not.
Hmm.
Maybe you were possessed.
Exactly. So these demons had some pretty perverse desires when they were around, and I think a lot of the stuff we see humans doing, I'm not trying to fully, you know,
Put the blame
absolve.
on Nephilim, right?
Yeah,
But
humans can do some pretty nasty things off their own volition. I think some humans could give demons a good run for the money sometimes.
and there are
But
clues to say that they are possessed or influenced at least, because I've
oh,
read a couple of
absolutely, yeah.
stories about shooters. There's the Parkland shooter who said that demons told them to kill, steal, or to burn, kill, and destroy. It repeated
Mhm.
those three words to him over and over, and that
Yeah.
he said demons convinced him to murder.
Well, it's easy, like I said, and Jerry Marcinski mentions this a lot, doesn't he? It's easy just to pass these people off as crazy and hearing voices and
Mhm.
schizophrenic, but um, I don't think they're making it up. I think it's real, and obviously, I think you think it's real. They have something in them, which, or maybe outside of them, whispering in their ear. Like I said, I think there are classes of demons. I think there are the more powerful demons, perhaps the actual firstborn Nephilim, are the ones doing the physical possession, the full control of the body, and doing what they want with it. I think
Yeah,
these lesser demons who don't have the skills or abilities are the ones kind of just
the intrusive thoughts.
being around the body, and helping the Nephilim get into, and this type of thing. I think they're the
Yeah,
ones whispering things in the ear. Yeah, and it's a scary thought when you think about it. But
it is, and this is what they feed off. It's negative emotional energy. That's why they tell people to murder and do all these awful things, because we create this negative environment. I mean, look at our world. Everything's negative, right? The news, the media,
mhm,
movies, books. I mean, you name it. We were talking about how spirits feed off negative emotional energy. And this is
mhm,
what Jerry Marzinski was saying when he had his experiences with the schizophrenic patients and all the stories
mhm.
he could tell.
I think
So,
it's interesting. We always discuss, many worldviews have their own description for these entities, and this whole energetic vampire aspect is very archonish from the Gnostic perspectives, and the demiurge perspective, which I don't go down that path. That's not where I stand on the
yeah, me
worldview,
neither.
obviously. But this idea that these entities are parasitic vampires, in a sense that, like I said, they need to get you energetically hyped up in a fear way in order to feed that off you and get that
Mhm.
energy. And it does seem to be quite a consistent behavioral pattern of the demons. But then I wonder, I do speculate on this idea. What's their end game there then? Because it's more beneficial for them to maintain a relationship with the host to continue experiencing the things they want to experience. So why push the host down the route of suicide, for example?
So
Or, you
from
know,
what I've learned, their goal is to gain as much negative emotional energy as possible. That's their food source, right?
mhm,
Because they're energetic beings, so their food is energy, and their
mhm,
bad energy is fear. The
yes,
the moment right before you unalive yourself, that is when you create the most fear. It is an
mhm,
incredibly scary thing to do, to take your own life. Very scary thing to do, because the spirit never acts against itself. So if there's
no,
somebody to convince you, somebody or some being to convince you to take your own life, that is incredibly terrifying. That is the pinnacle of fear. And this is why they want people to harm themselves. And the voices tell people to hurt yourself, hurt others, to create this negative emotional energy. So
I suppose at the end of the day, even if they do lose their host to suicide, there's plenty more people out there they can just move on to
we'll
the
find
next
another
thing.
one, right? Because
Yeah.
some of these, their hosts have families, and now their families are experiencing trauma. And now through that gateway, they enter
Mhm.
into their families' lives, and so on and so forth. And it's just a
No.
cycle. Misery loves company. It's a constant cycle.
Yeah, I mean, I actually have suicide in my family. My Okay, so my brother and sister have a different dad to me. They were born first. I'm the youngest. So my
Mhm.
mum and their father broke up. My mother met my father and had me. Um, so my mother and father have been together now for as long as I've been alive. But obviously, my mum's first relationship with this man, where she had my brother and sister, was quite short. Not long after they broke up, after having the children, they broke up. He went off and he had his own life, and he did occasionally visit to see his children, but he didn't have a good life. He went down the route of, you know, he was a builder joiner, so he was a freelance, and work wasn't always consistent. He was an alcoholic. He smoked heavily, and as we went on, he got into heavy drugs. The woman he ended up with was also into the same thing, heavy alcohol use, heavy drug use, and he went down that path. Um, and anyway, every time I saw him, he seemed like the happiest guy in the world. And I was young at the time, I suppose. This was 2009, 2010 region. Maybe even earlier than that, actually, maybe 2006. So I would have been about 15, 16, maybe, something like that. And I'd always seen him come and visit and be quite happy. He'd put on a front for everybody. But what happened in the end is he hung himself by his belt in a hotel room on his own. That's how his life ended. And none of us kind of saw it coming in that respect. But what you have in England after something like this is like an inquest, and it's a full court proceeding with everybody involved in his life to get to the bottom of what happened here. Just for closure for everybody, really, because it's one of those things, isn't it? Like, what do you do with this? Someone's just killed themselves. What do you do with that? How do you move on from that? The best the British system gives us is this closure system where you go through everything. And what we discovered is he had gone down a massive downward spiral over the last 6 months before he ended his life. He did heavy drug use of cocaine and alcohol, heavy drug use. And he was constantly saying to his friends and his loved ones, they're in the walls. I can hear them. They're in the walls. They're speaking to me. You're lying to me that you can't hear them. You're working for them. That type of stuff started happening. He started hearing voices. And I don't know what happened specifically, but he lied about where he was going to his friend, and he also lied to his partner about where he was going, so no one knew what was going on. And obviously he was found by the person cleaning the room the next day of what actually happened. No notes, nothing, But what we did discover is heavy drug use and the hearing of voices. Now, my family won't think much of that. They'll just think he went crazy from doing too many drugs. But with what I've been researching, where I've gone with this, I start to see this similar pattern emerging, like the things Jerry Marzinski talks about. And clearly what I believe now, he was a heavily demonized man, who was sent through this process, and he was a victim to begin with. He lost his wife. He didn't see his children very often. He ended up losing work, and it's just one bad thing after another sends you, it's exponential. Just as things grow exponentially, things get bad quickly. When one thing goes wrong, everything starts to go wrong, and it doesn't take long to hit the bottom. And that's clear what happened to him, So that's a personal story I have with this idea that, these entities will drive you to the end. That's where it leads if you don't find Jesus and purpose and meaning and claw yourself back up. And it's not easy, but you have to do the work, And
it's stories like this, man, which proves that learning about demons and how they work is incredibly important to spot the signs, right? As soon as a person starts talking about dark stuff or posting dark stuff on social media or using alcohol more heavily, these are signs, that they're slowly becoming demonized. And these demons want their victim to isolate themselves. So, a lot of churches, I've gone to many services, throughout my life, and this is not something to talk about. I think it's a little ignorant to not talk about this stuff. You have a lot of people in churches who also hear these voices. They hear these intrusive thoughts, the nightmares, and the pastor doesn't talk about it, right? They'll just basically say, oh, have you been taking your meds? That's what one guy commented. I had a psych nurse comment on one of my videos that when he brought up these issues to one of his pastors, because he used to hear voices, and his pastor would just say, oh, have you been on your meds? Have you been taking your stuff? And that's it. They're completely ignorant on these subjects. And it's incredibly stupid to be ignorant on the devil's devices.
Well, again, a lot of pastors and people in mainstream churches are more, family community churches, let's say, and churches, that have that image of, everything's just love and God is love and you don't have to focus on the bad type of attitude. They don't know it. They don't know about the Nephilim. They don't know about demons, really. That's something that they used to preach years ago, in the old times.
Like it's a fairy tale, or it only happened during Old and New Testament times, and it doesn't exist today. I'm like, it does exist. It's been relabeled.
it's that age-old problem of, the church tries to change to adapt to the world rather than trying to change the world to their view. So
Perfectly said. Yeah.
if science says it's schizophrenia and they need to be on their meds, then we go with the science, because we're those good Christians that don't go against the
Yeah, we're
change.
those intellectuals, right? We don't want to seem
Yeah,
like those crazy, overly religious people who are just dumb, believing in magic and stories and all that.
and I find funny those types of. I'm not trying to put Christians down here, but I do find a lot of those types are the intellectual Christians. They do seem to philosophize a lot when they talk. A lot of them have their own YouTube channels as well, and they do a lot of talking about stuff, which it amounts to a whole lot of nothing in the end. A lot of speculation about things that aren't relevant to anything real happening in people's lives. Like I said,
Yeah.
my brother and sister's father losing his mind. They're talking more about church doctrine and philosophies, and with which philosophy is more important over this philosophy. And it's kind of like, I'm pretty sure it says somewhere in the Bible about people do this, and they don't really know Jesus.
No, yeah.
It's just vain bickerings about fanciful ideas that get nowhere and help nobody.
Another thing I don't like hearing is like, I remember seeing this one video of a pastor saying that sometimes we over spiritualize things. And I'm like, there's no such thing. Everything is spiritual. Going to the mall with your friends is spiritual. You're interacting with other souls, not to mention spirits influencing these other souls, right?
Mm-hmm.
Every single thing is spiritual. And to say it's not spiritual, like you're putting yourself in a dangerous situation, because then schizophrenia is not spiritual, right? Nightmares is not spiritual. Disassociations, all these things that are labeled as mental issues or something physical are non-spiritual. Mm-hmm. So if they're non-spiritual, right, what are people going to start doing? Looking for physical solutions, pills, therapy sessions. And a lot of the time, these things don't work. Or maybe they're just like a Band-Aid, right? They just tranquilize you for a little bit, as Jerry Marzinski would say.
Treat the symptoms, not the cause.
Exactly. Yeah. The real solution is, if it's a spiritual problem, then you need a spiritual solution, which is Jesus Christ. And not just saying his name, but abiding in his word, avoiding the devil's devices, right? Not messing with sorcery, mind-altering drugs, not messing with witchcraft, not giving into fear. The most repeated command in the Bible is what? Do not fear, over and over and over. What do people do? We feed anxiety, we feed fear, we feed depression. And the Bible even calls depression and anxiety, it calls it a spirit, the spirit of heaviness, the spirit of fear. So Bible gives us complete instructions on how to avoid these beings. Right? So it's very interesting that even forgiving others, believe it or not, is actually a way for us to avoid demons. Have you ever heard that parable of the king that Jesus gave about forgiving?
Reiterate, but I can't remember.
So yeah, I'll try to reiterate as best as possible. But in this parable, there's a king, right? And he has a servant that owes him a lot of money. But the king decides to be merciful towards that servant. But what that servant goes and does is that servant has a servant, and he doesn't forgive him his debt, even though that servant owes him less, right? Mm-hmm. So when the king hears of this, he takes that servant that didn't give the same mercy that the king showed to his servant, and he throws him in jail to the tormentors. And at the end of the parable, Jesus says, if you do not forgive, I will hand you over to the tormentors. Because what happens when we don't forgive, right? We have resentment, anger, depression, and these emotions, they feed spirits, right? So God is literally saying, if you don't forgive others, I will throw you to these spirits, to these demons, basically. They're going to feed off you.
I believe this because I myself, as I grew up, like I said, I wasn't a spiritual person growing up. I didn't have any connection with God in any way or any form of spirituality. In fact, I don't like who I was pre-20 something. I was quite a narcissistic, vain, big-headed, self-centered person who was out for number one. I made enemies, I had enemies, and I realized there came a point where I had a revelation, and I literally had to say to myself, Paul, if everybody in the room is calling you a head, you probably are one. You probably are one, and then that's when things started to change. That's when I started to learn about truth, and I very slowly
becoming born again.
Became born in a completely different.
Oh yeah, I was a completely different person before 2020.
Yeah, but I held on to a lot of resentment. I made enemies, and I held on to that anger and that hatred for a long time.
It eats you up, man. It's bad.
Yeah. People who had wronged me physically and mentally, and things that I held in my mind, fantasies of revenge, things like this, and it brought me nothing but pain and misery in the end.
Yeah.
And the sad thing is, once I was born again, and once I'd started to focus more on myself, my life, improving everyone else's life around me, giving rather than taking all the time, I very quickly forgave them, and it wasn't difficult to forgive them by this point. I'd let go. It was that letting go was such relief. It was kind of,
Yeah.
you
It's
know,
amazing how practical the Bible is, man. Like everything in the Bible is for our own good.
but
Everything,
it's,
every
yeah,
line.
absolutely, absolutely. But the sad thing was, I realized, no, all this resentment I was holding wasn't even real. It was something I'd made up in my own mind, you know.
Yeah,
And you realize they victimized because they were victims, and that's how hurt people hurt people.
exactly. Yeah.
It's just a cycle, and someone has to break it somewhere. And that's kind of, I suppose it comes with growing up as well.
And
You
that's
get
what makes
wiser.
us separate, right? As believers, we're supposed to break these cycles. We're not supposed to engage or make it worse.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we've discussed a lot of things. I think when we started, with the Nephilim, where do they come from? Why
Hmm.
do we have demons? How demons operate? We've discussed, the many levels of demons and the hierarchies, what their end game is, what they want from their actions, why they do what they do. We've gone through all this cycle, and this is all the stuff I was researching for years before I got to the clown conclusion. So I knew had all this stuff already. I had those experiences with the visuals, and
Hmm.
seeing the jester, seeing this Hatman entity, exploring DMT realms, psychedelic realms. I already had all this, and when this clown sighting thing happened, it all kind of just clicked, and I was like, "There's something to this demon clown thing." Okay, so I literally just did a Google search, and I literally typed in Nephilim, demons, clowns. And what I got was a video, a very short 3-minute video. And it was by a very small YouTube channel. I don't even know the name of them now. They were nobody. They weren't anyone who got anywhere or did anything or had any influence over anything. But they had made a video where they were basically taking the piss out of people who believe in the Nephilim. They were mocking Christians, mocking the Christian belief of giants and Nephilim in general. And during this mocking, they were pretending to be a Christian, theorizing about it. And they
Mm.
basically said, so these giants had white skin and red hair and had blood and cannibalistic nature to them and all this sort of stuff. So what we're dealing with are interdimensional killer clowns. And that's where it clicked. I was like, you may be taking the piss out of us, but you're more right than you actually know, is what I thought. And I went with that. I rolled with it. I started doing my own research into it, and I realized it's obvious. It's everywhere. Secret societies, Freemasons, Shriners, the Royal Order of the Jesters. It's everywhere. They are showing it to us all the time.
Yeah.
They're putting
Music.
it in our face, and it was always there. And it's really incredibly obvious once you start to realize that the clown, as we call it today, the modern representation of a clown, is a caricature of these ancient Nephilim gods, because they're always described as having pale porcelain white serpentine like skin of some kind, very pale in nature, and wild red hair. And that's a clown. We
Really,
just
yeah.
stylized it, and then the fractaled psychedelic patterned clothing they often wear, I think is a nod or a wink to the disembodied fractaled like nature now. And that's all it is. And it's
Mhm.
also, there's many I've done like 18 episodes on this, but many of these Nephilim were serpentine like, and they developed snake like features from their fathers, the
Slits in the
seraphim.
eyes. Yeah.
Yeah, the seraphim angels, and if you ever look at a reptile's skin, it's pretty colorful and psychedelic. They're not always just one color. They are many patterns, colors, and it
Mm.
gets wild. So I'm thinking a lot of these Nephilim had skin like the clothing clowns wear, literally like a serpent skin, like
Yeah.
a chameleon skin, colorful. But I think the white face was a common feature. The white face, the red lips, the big wide double row teeth smile. They had
Dark
six.
void eyes is a big one
Yeah,
too.
exactly. Yeah, they had 6 fingers, 6 toes. You know, they were huge. They were monstrous. They were lanky, long. You know, clowns wear stilts regularly to show that they have giants. They put big gloves on to say they have giant hands. They wear
The big shoes too, yeah.
big shoes to indicate they have massive feet. You know, that the clown is a cartoon version of the real thing that once existed.
And
And it's venerated through secret societies. They have cults dedicated to the clown. And it all just started to fall into place after
I
that
think
moment, you know.
think of the shamans. I made a video a long time ago called the demon's puppets, basically. And I explained how just like the shamans, right, they invoke a spirit and then they start dressing like the spirit or the spirit that's possessing them, they start turning him into its own image, right?
Yep.
Depraved, ugly, disgusting looking. And what would a shaman do? He would paint his face white, paint the jester smile, right? Like the sacred clowns and a lot of tribes worship throughout the world. And they
Yep.
would wear this kind of stuff. And it got me thinking about people like the goth community, right? Emo goth, what do they wear? They look like what is that one movie? Beetlejuice. You know the Beetlejuice
Yes.
entity? That's what they
Yep. Yep.
basically dress like, right? They wear these black and white stripes, checkerboard, or the black and white Tim Burton like aesthetic. And then they sometimes have colorful hair, green, basically looking like Beetlejuice. And I'm thinking,
Yep.
I'm like, are these the spirits influencing them to dress like this? Could be.
Well, one of my recent videos is about just that. I do an episode about it. So it talks about the trans community as well and drag queen culture, similar outfits, quite clownish features. You know, it talks about many different fashion styles that the youth go into. So you have scene culture. You know, you have like I said, goth culture. There's very bizarre ones. Like there's even a clown aesthetic right now, which kind of piggybacks off of the scene culture, which piggybacks off of a Japanese fashion style, but it's all the same kind of aesthetic. There's like a line that runs through it, and it's clown like.
Yeah. Do you remember the drug revolution from the 60s and 70s?
Yeah, yeah.
What happened with the fashion trends? It became psychedelic.
Psychedelic.
Jimi
Exactly. Yeah.
Hendrix, right? He was all colorful and he took a lot of acid and other drugs as well. And all these
Purple was a very common color, wasn't it? As well, you know, you had Prince as well, and it's the music industry is one whole subcategory for this because the music is rife with people who look like clowns and have made themselves to look like demonic clown entities. It's actually terrifying how much they do it, and it's not just the clown. A joker or a jester is another. I suppose the next level up from a clown, if you want to go in hierarchies, but it's another type of Nephilim entity similar to the clown that is in the same realm. And you see a lot of people venerating this jester-like entity, and you also see a lot of people venerating the hat man-like entity as well. Like Slash is a good example. If you want to go into music, he wears the top hat, you know,
or pimps as well, right? Don't pimps wear like the coats and the hat?
Yeah, exactly. And you have to understand that I think what we've got to is the spirit. Either the individual dresses like that knowingly to evoke the spirits to them. So the shamans would do that. They would dress in a way they know they need to dress in order to get the spirit to come. Or people unknowingly are dressing a certain way and inviting spirits to them in ignorance. It works both ways. And if it's in ignorance, well, that's great for the demons because then they can do what they want and get away with it quite easily. If it's knowingly, that's great for the person doing it because they want the demons to come and harvest power from them or make a deal or whatever they want to do. You know, it's yeah. I think clothing and what you wear is a huge part of this because I think it's a mirror of the spiritual. What happens here is no different than what's happening in the spiritual realm.
Basically.
You know?
Well, you know the corpse makeup in the music industry? You ever seen corpse makeup?
Yeah, it's really common,
Heavy
isn't
metal
it?
scene, right? You have a lot of people wearing the jester, the white, the black lipstick, the eyeshadow. Like the band Black Veiled Bride, I believe.
I've heard, I've seen
they
their album.
They dress like jester, and this is common everywhere. If you really pay attention, this aesthetic is incredibly common.
It's everywhere. Slipknot do it. All of the band members do it. Limp Bizkit, the lead guitarist, does it. He dresses in crazy clown-like clothing all the time. Honestly, it's all of them. Yeah. Even every mainstream pop artist has a music video somewhere where they're dressed in black and white stripes or have a clown. outfit somewhere.
Harry Styles at the Grammys, he was wearing that weird jester like outfit.
Yeah,
Yeah, with
absolutely.
yeah.
And the black and white lines is a really common motif. Really common. It's universal, it seems. Even like I said, Beetlejuice is wearing the black and white blazer and suits, this pinstripe black and white. That seems to be the running theme throughout all of this. And many have theorized what it's about, but I think it's there to specifically represent the fractal nature of the being, spiritual nature of the being. I think it's how do I describe this? It's really hard to describe because we're talking about
It's
really
hard to put into words, but to simplify
complex.
it as best as possible, the way people
Yeah.
dress and act in the music industry and what's shown to us on television, media, this is a representation of what's going on in the spiritual world, right?
Exactly.
These are all puppets basically influencing humans to go against God. That's the simple way to put it.
I think it's fascinating as well that obviously I made my series in 2016.
Yeah.
And for those 2 years until 2018, when I had to leave, because my workplace had found my channel was threatening to demote me and all sorts of stuff was going on. I left, and I had made it clear, this clown thing is serious, guys. You need to look into it. I was silent for like 4 years. And then Conspiracy R started making videos about it.
A great channel.
And he kind of revitalized the topic. And then a year later, I came back and started doing my thing. But in that time period, the phrase clown world had blown up after I kind of left YouTube. And everyone was talking about how ridiculously clownish the world has become. And I was just, again thinking, it's all kind of coming together.
Yeah, it was after 2016. Things got really weird. I've never heard of liberals and all of this weird inverted, like it got so confusing and clownish. Everything was incredibly strange after 2016. And now that you mention it, it started happening after the clown sightings.
Just after the clown sightings,
incredibly bizarre. Really,
exactly. It was around the time Trump first got into the presidency as well. Yeah. I'm not here to say one thing or other about the politics of all that, but that's what drove people insane. It really brought the SJWs, we'll call them, out of the woodworks, and we really started to see these screeching lunatics who were easily offended about everything. And what aesthetic did they often have that's been memed repeatedly? They had bright colored hair, crazy lipstick makeup on in some way, crazy clothing. They were gender bending, and they were doing all sorts of crazy things to themselves and their bodies, and piercings, manipulations, tattoos. I think the spirit in them was manifesting quite clearly, and it's the Nephilim clown-like entities, And I think what they like to do is they like to make the host they are well ingrained into look like them. Just like the good old days. The Nephilim had the people look like them. Why would they change the habit of a lifetime now? They would do the same thing, whether it's spiritual or physical. And I think that's what we saw.
It's basically inverting, God's order. Everything God says to do, they tell you to do the opposite, right? They invert every single thing. And they want to make you into their image, depraved, inverted, backwards, destructive.
Yeah, I call them the multicolored collective in my recent video. Yeah, because they're not just a specific class of people who have one specific belief system. They are many factions and subcultures and groups that have come together under one umbrella. Yeah, we'll call it the alphabet people, the multicolored rainbow people, the clowns. We'll call them. It's all kind of it's all there. It's all there in the symbology.
And even with this, like the politics stuff, so you got this good cop, bad cop dynamic to cause this chaos and destruction, and to have this hate and fear and anger and resentment to, again, extract as much negative emotional energy from everyone, right? It's crazy. It's insane what happened. Now that you mentioned it, I just pieced it together. Like, it started after 2016. Clown world really blew up after that. That's interesting. Yeah,
it became a meme in the consciousness of everyone, not just conspiracy people, but I mean the mainstream. The clown world thing was a thing. Yeah. Everyone understood that the world is going wild, and like I said, divisions are being sown so heavy during this period, politically especially, but over everything, people are just divided. Yeah, and not to mention obviously the crown virus thing that came along and turned everything upside down along with it as well. It really went haywire, and that brought out the worst in people too. And I think, I worked in retail during that time, and I truly saw the worst of humanity in that time. I truly did. It was horrifying to witness and to be on the receiving end of a lot of that abuse. Um,
Yeah, that's
yes.
what Jerry Marzinski said about that whole time period in 2020 when this whole situation happened. Is he said what demons do to schizophrenics, they have now done to everyone on a massive scale, a macro
Hmm.
scale, right? They
Fear.
isolate us, right? They got
Yeah.
us to sit at home by ourselves, and that created a whole lot of negative emotional energy. And like you said, it brought out the worst of people.
Hmm. Honestly, I saw people do things I never, step over their own grandmother just for an extra packet of toilet rolls. You know what I mean?
That blew
Like,
my mind. I had no idea what was going on. People fighting over toilet paper, not food.
uh,
It was
yeah,
so clownish. It was chaotic. It was incredible. I'm like, wow, this is insane.
there was no reason behind, no rhyme or reason. And I think a lot of this has to do with going on the clown thing again. When someone puts on a mask, they think they get possessed by some kind of spirit in some way, because it's easy when you have a mask on to act in a way you would not normally act.
Yeah.
When you take on the role of anonymity, you do not act like you would normally act when you are publicly available for people to see. It's
Yeah.
the whole internet troll phenomenon. It's the same thing. And when everybody suddenly had to wear a mask, and if you didn't, you were Satan himself. I think that gave people the confidence to be who they truly were. you know, Even though the mask was on, the real mask was off by that point,
Yeah. They
and
could
what was
be
the
themselves.
spirit in them came out. And
And
yeah,
they
it
get
just
influenced by the spirit of strife and cause all this chaos, basically. It was like
yeah,
Pandora's box was open. It was a crazy time. And it started after 2016. Yeah.
just for a little bit as well. They just opened it for a little bit and then shut it.
And then
And we got a
something
glimpse.
happened.
We got a glimpse, of what it would be like in the end when men's hearts will fail them through fear.
Yeah, it's funny because I've seen all these memes where it basically shows like a roller coaster, right? And it's like, oh, 2016, here's the peak, and then boom, it just falls. And I'm
Yeah.
like, yeah, something happened in 2016. It got really strange quick.
And I think it's funny, it was trumpeted in by the clowns. First, we had the clown sightings, and then one thing after they started rolling in.
Politics and yeah, and it got all strange.
Yeah, yeah. So that's
Very
I don't. I'm not sure we can go too much deeper into this. It's getting
Oh, I
quite late
think
for
I think
me.
we've said enough. Yeah, this was great. Hey man, thank you
But
so much for coming on here. I think this was a fruitful conversation. I hope the audience enjoyed it. I'm gonna put all your links in the bio below, so your YouTube channel and any other links that you would like me to put down. But yeah, man,
yeah,
thank you
just
so
just
much for
just
coming.
take them, from one of my videos. I've got some links at the bottom. Just copy paste them. But yeah, if people want to check out my series on this, I'm still doing it.
Yep.
I make videos about other things as well. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Same here.
uh,
We don't just talk about just pure demonic stuff. We talk about other topics as well. So
if anyone wants to join one of my truth or therapy sessions, then I do them quite regularly every week, and it's just a community where you can talk about whatever you want, and I will present some information, some talking points to get people going. I'm thinking of actually opening up. I used to do this years ago at the phone lines, so people could call in and actually say what's on their mind, what they're researching, how they're dealing with it. And I think it's really cathartic for people to hear that there are other people out there going through the same thing they are,
yeah.
and it makes them feel a little bit less alone, less fear, and that's a good thing all around.
I
So
basically do that. I've actually interviewed some of my subscribers. They would comment their story, like the ex-meth addict. I'm like, hey, I'd love to interview
mhm.
you, and it happened. Yeah,
Yeah, I watched that one. It was good. It was good.
very interesting.
Yeah. Again, we have to stay together. We're a community here. At the end of the day, it's not, people don't like being branded one thing or the other. We have different beliefs, but we're all in it together, and we're all just trying to learn the truth. So let's just work together. Let's not go into the fear divide thing that's going on everywhere. Let's not act like clowns.
Yeah,
That's the way I see it.
be like
Anyway, man.
right, like the Bible says, true believers in Christ. Yeah. Again, man, thank you so much, and I will see you next time.